Okay, so today we're going to talk about what makes a good sentence. So before we left school, we had been learning about subject and predicate. And in my class, I had these nice posters on the wall, but I forgot to grab them on the way out, so I don't have them with me. So what I did is I made my own little version of the poster that we had on our wall. And there's a subject and a predicate. So if we look, we can remember that a subject of a sentence tells us who or what the sentence is about, and a predicate tells us what they're doing in the sentence. So if we look at my first example here, the cat sleeps, we can see that the subject, the cat, tells us who our sentence is about, and the predicate, sleeps, tells us what the cat is doing. Another example, the dogs bark loudly. The subject tells us who our sentence is about, the dogs. The predicate tells us what the dogs are doing. They bark loudly is the predicate. So remember that a good sentence has to have a subject and a predicate in order to be a good sentence. It can't just have one or the other. It has to have both pieces together to make a good sentence. So I'm going to share my screen and show you some examples of exactly what I mean by that so that you can figure out what to do for your questions. So if we look at my sentence here, I'm going to give you just a minute so you can read it. The little boy smiled happily. So let's see if we can find the subject. Remember, the subject tells us who or what our sentence is about. You should have said the little boy is our subject because that tells us who the sentence is about, and what is the little boy doing would be our predicate. Smiled happily would be our predicate. This tells us what the little boy is doing in our sentence. So here we have a subject and we have a predicate. Do we have a good sentence or a bad sentence? Do we have all the parts that we need? I see a subject and a predicate, which means we have a good sentence. It is good to go. Now, let's look at a different example. I'll give you just a second to read. The crying babies. Is that a complete sentence with a subject and a predicate, or an incomplete sentence that's missing something? Let's look. The crying babies. This part of the sentence would be the subject. It tells us who we're talking about. We're talking about some babies that are crying. The word crying is describing the babies. The crying babies. Do we know what the crying babies are doing? We don't. So we're missing the predicate part of this sentence. There is no predicate to this sentence. They only have the subject that tells us who is doing something. This is what's called an incomplete sentence or a sentence fragment. It is a bad sentence, so it gets a big X because it's missing part of the sentence. If I just came up to you and said, the crying babies, you'd probably look at me like, what in the world is Miss Brooks talking about? That doesn't make any sense because I'm missing part of the sentence. This sentence is incomplete, so it gets an X. It is not a sentence that is ready to go on a paper. Let's look at another one. The angry crowd. Do I have a complete sentence or an incomplete sentence? So we have to look and see if all of our parts are there. The angry crowd tells us who we're talking about. So that would be the subject of our sentence. Do we have a predicate? Do we know what the angry crowd is doing? We do not. We are missing the predicate part of this sentence. So is this a good sentence or a bad sentence? I should see thumbs down. This is not a sentence that is ready for paper because it's incomplete. It's missing the predicate. Remember, a good sentence has to have a subject and a predicate. We have to know who or what and what they're doing in order to have a complete sentence. All right, another sentence. Runs to the house. If I came up to you and I said, runs to the house, You're probably going to say, what? What is she talking about? So let's look and see if we have all the parts of our sentence. Runs to the house. Would that tell us who or what our sentence is about? Or would that tell us what they're doing? That's going to tell us what they're doing, which remember is the predicate part of the sentence. So here we have the predicate. We know what they're doing, but do we know who is running to the house? No, it doesn't tell us. On this sentence, we're missing the subject. We don't know who is running to the house. So is this a complete sentence or an incomplete sentence? Should see thumbs down. This one gets an X. It's incomplete. It does not have all of the parts that it needs to be a good sentence. So this page is just a reminder here that you need to remember that a complete sentence must have a subject that tells us who or what, and it must have a predicate that says what they are doing. If your sentence is missing a part, if it's missing the subject or it's missing the predicate, then it is an incomplete sentence. It is not a good sentence that is ready for paper. So you're going to check the next sentences down below and tell me if they are complete, if they have all the parts they need, the subject and the predicate, or you're going to tell me if they're incomplete, if they're missing a part and the sentence doesn't make any sense. Do your very best down below on your questions.